Thank you very much. Good morning, dear Secretary General of the National Commission for UNESCO in the Caribbean, experts in open educational resources, UNESCO colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning again. On behalf of UNESCO, I'm most delighted to welcome you to this workshop for teachers, and open educational resources tailored for the Caribbean and small island developing states. This workshop is the first activity in the Caribbean sub-region following the kickoff meeting. The event took place on December 7th last year. We celebrate the progress achieved of this first meeting, which is addressed in the OER recommendation as the first area of action. This workshop is designed to develop the capacity of our valuable partners to use both the ICT Competency Framework for teachers and access OERs. It is undoubtedly a vital step to transit from theory to practice. This is a step also in the path to digital inclusion in an effort not to let the digital divide become the new face of inequality. This is a step to contribute to design digital environments to connect everyone with a positive future, as the UN Deputy Secretary General said once, just a few months ago. UNESCO is committed to supporting the member states and associates in achieving inclusive quality education for all. UNESCO views information and communication technologies for teachers and learners as key to enable access to information while fostering innovation and creativity. Furthermore, ACT-based solutions, when applied to school operation, can also facilitate better planning and monitoring of educational activities and learning processes. On their side, open educational resources, OER, have demonstrated their potential to build open and inclusive knowledge societies and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, in the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of OER during nationwide school closures was especially, and still is, especially significant. Today's workshop will be followed by several other activities that will help us to jointly advance the implementation of the ER recommendation at the national government level, mainly in collaboration with the National Commission for UNESCO and in coordination with other partners working in the region and interregionally in the Caribbean seas. I wish you a very productive session. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Director Sanchez. We greatly appreciate you joining us this morning, this opening, and we do apologize for the small technical hiccup.
No problem. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, and for organizing this important workshop.
So, dear colleagues, after this inspiring opening by Director Sanchez, we would like to just provide you with an overview of the initiatives that are the overarching initiatives that are around our discussion today. And I will be providing you with the background on the ICT, the project, overall global project, ICT Competency Framework for Teachers Harnessing OER, and the related open education resources work that we're doing. Today's workshop I'll provide you with an overview of what we're doing. First of all, why we're doing it, the UN commitments that are related, and an overview of OER and what we're doing in this area and how it links to the work that you started in December, on the 9th of December, in a very important workshop that was organized by UNESCO Kingston and UNESCO Havana for the recommendation, and the link to ICT Competency Framework for Teachers, which is a tool that's been used by UNESCO worldwide for teacher training on digital skills, and then an overview of what we do specifically nationally with this project, and open the floor for questions and answers. My presentation will be brief, but the last point will be basically will be the focus of our discussions for the rest of the afternoon. And my colleague Andrew Moore, who's here with us, who is an expert in this area, will be leading us through this last point throughout the morning. So the UN commitments, why are we talking about this? We have two main instruments. They were done much earlier before we had issues of digital inclusion, and we had OER over 70 years ago in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was Article 19 was written, and it's about the right to receive and impart information through any media, regardless of frontiers. And this is still extremely relevant, even more so today in the 21st century. And of course, Article 26, which is the right to education. The other basis for our discussions is UNESCO's constitutional commitment to the free exchange of ideas and knowledge to support the sharing of knowledge using technologies. That being said, there is the UNESCO OER recommendation. Now, I realize many of our colleagues here are from national commissions, so you are aware what a recommendation is, but you will stay with me or bear with me. I'll just go over very briefly. It's a recommendation is in the semantic sense. It's recommendations to member states of actions they may wish to take in a certain area. But it is a document which is very serious at UNESCO. There aren't, as you see on the right-hand side of my screen, there are lists of recommendations from 2019 to 1989, and there's only about 10. So in this area, and so this is a recommendation is a legal instrument of UNESCO, and the OER recommendation was adopted in 2019. So it's a rather young recommendation, and it's available, of course, on the UNESCO website in full. In this recommendation, what's really important for our discussion today, and I'd really very much like you to take note, is the definition, because open educational resources are educational resources, so videos, books, what have you, but they must be released on either in the public domain or under a copyright that's under an open license that permits no-cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, or redistribution. The recommendation also has a very clear definition of open license. It's a license that respects intellectual property rights and that grants the copyright owner and provides permissions provides permissions to the public to access, reuse, repurpose, adapt, redistribute. Now, the reason this is very important to keep in mind is that it's not the same as educational resources that are free, that you can access for free. It has to have an open license, so it allows you to also be able to use them, repurpose them, redistribute, and so on. It's not the same as just resources that you may be able to access that are on a platform like that, but have a copyright that doesn't allow for these different points. The other thing that's really interesting to look at inside this recommendation, or at least at the beginning, is the stakeholders. As you will see on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a huge list of stakeholders. This is larger than a typical educational document. It's beyond the education sector. It includes libraries, it includes archives and museums, media, authors, broadcasting groups. But of course, the primary stakeholders are the educational community, and we are UNESCO, and governments are the most important of these stakeholders. However, it's important to note that this is a document which really does talk about knowledge sharing in the large sense of the word. Now, today you're going to hear for the next couple of hours, we'll be talking about the ICT Competency Framework for Teachers. I'm sure you probably have heard of it before. It's been around since 2008, and it was revised 2 times, in 2013, 2012, I'm sorry, and 2011 actually, and then in 2018. And it was revised to take into account technological developments each time. It's basically an overview on terms of the aspects. So on the right hand here, on the left-hand side of the document, you have the different areas that a teacher undertakes in his or her professional work. So this is the first one is about policy, the second curriculum assessment, etc. The main idea, the whole point of this document is that instructors, teachers must have competencies in the use of technologies in their professional practice in order to be able to guide the development of students, learners' competencies in this area. And this is even more true as our lives become increasingly digital, and as Director Sanchez pointed out in her opening remarks, digital skills training is key to inclusion, even more so today than it was 2 years ago, and it will continue to be so. The target audience of this document are teacher and instructor training personnel, educational experts, policy makers, teacher instructor support personnel, other providers of professional learning. This document is not for students per se. It does not provide training materials for students in the classroom. It's for teacher training or instructor training. It has 3 levels. It's from basic to advanced. Basically, it's called knowledge acquisition, deepening, creation in the 3rd version. Now, just to give you a very quick overview of how the document works, you'll be going into it more during the next session, but here at the back of we have tables in this document. The beginning of the document has more narrative, but at the end we have tables, and this is the framework itself. So on the first aspect, so we're talking about this box here, it's about policy, the first point of the first point, which is about policy understanding. The document states that the curricular goals for teacher training is that the teacher makes a connection between the policy and his or her classroom practice. Then the document goes on to articulate the competency in a statement and shows the objectives. So the first objective is how policy implementation is shaping classroom practice, and identify the use of using ICT in a safe and accessible manner. And then it gives you examples of how this can be incorporated into a training program. So to have institutional national policies, practices in a discussion, identify practices, etc. So the whole point is that there is a link there. Each of these points has the same structure, that you have a curricular goal, a teacher competency, an objective, and an example activity linked to it. I realize I just went very quickly, but we'll be going back to that point over and over. So to go on to the next point that we will be talking about in our discussion this morning, it's a hub that has been developed by UNESCO and its partners at the national level. And it's a hub that brings together open educational resources. So teaching resources on an open license developed to support teacher training in the different aspects of the ICT Competency Framework. So we have worked with a number of countries, and the first country to work on this project was from the region. It was Guyana, and it was around 2010. I think Andrew can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, about 10 to 12 in that period then, yeah.
And it was so long ago that they were actually using CDs and not the internet. So we'll have more discussion on that. And from there, we've worked with Rwanda, and we have with us today Vincent Nierga, who is from the Rwanda Education Board, who will talk about what they have done in this project in this area. The Philippines, Indonesia, Togo. We have two schools actually but you have only one on the screen, in South Africa. And there's also a link to the Commonwealth of Learning Certificate for Teacher ICT Integration, and Zimbabwe, amongst others. Most of these institutions have worked at the K-12 level, while some, for example, Matthew Gurney School of Leadership and Governance, Djibouti, have worked at the teacher training level and at the for teachers for higher education also. So how does this work? So you have the same table. We have the same thing. The thing I showed you before. You have the policy understanding, the example from before. And then in the aligned courses on this site, you have policy understanding. And here you have a series of courses developed by colleagues all over the world that are openly licensed. So you can use, reuse, adapt, contextualize these courses legally and for free. And they are here. And for example, this one, Rwanda, Vincent will be able to give us more information. This is from Rwanda, and it links to policy understanding. It's available on an open license. And the interpreters can't hear me. I see. Okay. I'll try to speak louder. I don't have headphones. So this is how it works. This is what Andrew will be talking about for the rest of the day, and we'll be working on the project. This table shows you the whole process. You have the idea is to start. The idea is to start at the level of national priorities. Then the development of OER-based teacher training tools, pilot training, scaling up, sharing the tools that you've developed, and then the sharing of the expertise for it to continue. So this is the project in a nutshell. So this is my contact information, and I'll put it in the chat also. And I'll just go back to this slide and take, if there's a question, I see just one question so far in the discussion that is not about, that's not technical, about the sound zones. So it's, what about developed countries? Do they use this framework too? This framework is for the entire world. We have worked with UNESCO. Our focus, our priority is not developed countries. For example, we don't work in the Europe region and United North America. We haven't worked with them directly because our focus has been to work with those countries that are priorities for our work. But it is used worldwide, and it was developed in collaboration with the DigiComp group at the European Union. Also, the European Union has taken this and developed a similar instrument, but based on only for Europe because its mandate is within Europe. But this is the only international instrument that is available. Are there any other questions? No. Okay, I will give the floor therefore to Andrew. Andrew, please go ahead.
Welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen as well. Let's see if this works. Right. Welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Moore. I've been very fortunate to work with UNESCO over the years. We were talking about 2010 and 2012 in the very early days when the ICT CFT was getting underway. Been around the developing world, helping various ministries and higher education institutions implement the ICT CFT. So my role really is to provide you with a value statement. Why should you bother? All right, so I'm going to demonstrate how the relationship between the ICT CFT and open educational resources, or OERs, is really now, and the experience of all the various countries who've played in the sandbox before, how now what we're offering you is almost a ready-made package which you can take and adapt for your contexts. All right, so let's click on and then you'll see. All right, so here's a problem statement. And this is what we're hoping that this afternoon, or in your case this morning, you'll be able to answer. All right. How do we get teachers to integrate ICT effectively into teaching and learning and into their other administrative duties? Okay, so especially in the developing world, we're finding a lot of educators are either reticent or they're just not sure how to do it. And that's what we're hoping we can give you some suggestions about how it might be done. The tools in our toolbox, there are 3. So we're going to make you do a little bit of research in a moment. We've got a little tutorial made for you, which will go into a bit more detail, and it's multimedia, so it should be a little bit more exciting than Zeynep and I yattering on. But those little tutorials will show you the relationship between these 3 tools. So the first one is the framework. And as already mentioned, the framework has been put together by education experts. It has evolved over the years. We've mentioned that there was a version in 2008, another version in 2011, and the more recent version in 2018. And even now we're thinking maybe it needs some sprucing up. Maybe there'll be one in the future. The second tool in the toolbox is the hub. All right, so we have found a place on the internet where we've been able to put all the resources that have been developed in order for teachers to acquire the competencies that are in the framework. And the beauty is that they are all open educational resources. Right, they are OER, and they're sitting on OER Commons. In fact, we talk of the hub, but it's really OER Commons database, and they've all been indexed so that you can find them easily. You can say, I'm interested in teachers acquiring competency X, and then you can ask it to do a search, find me all the resources that have been developed for competency X. And then up they come. The vast majority of them have been licensed. I don't know if you know your Creative Commons licenses, but the vast majority of them are CC by SA. Creative Commons, attribution, meaning that you can use it, but you must attribute where the source came from. And SA, share alike, which means that your resource that you develop, your derivative, should have the same license, which is quite fair. So there's no money involved. There's no permissions needed to be granted or anything like that. You can go into the hub, take what you want, fix it, and as long as you keep it in the open movement and that you acknowledge where the various resources came from in the first place, then that's it. That is your financial commitment. Obviously, there are costs in adapting and translating and putting it on your own server, etc. But in terms of the intellectual property, the resources are all open. All right. And then the third tool in our toolbox, is the network. I mentioned previously that for quite some years now, we've been working with various ministries and universities and teacher training colleges to develop these materials. And these people are very keen to engage with you if you go this route and guide you and provide you with some advice, etc. So we have a little network as well, a community of experienced practitioners. All right, so that is kind of the tools. So how do they hold together? I've already mentioned the framework. You can see the little blue one. You might find that still on the internet. It's quite common still. Is the 2011 version. And the white and yellow version is the 2018 version. And I put a link in the chat earlier so that you can go and get the language version that you require. So there is a Spanish one. There is a French one. There is various other languages as well, Arabic, and some languages I don't even know what they really are. So go and have a look at that link in the chat and get a version which you feel comfortable reading. And yeah, we're going to want you to get under the hood in the next few hours. All right, so you're going to need that document. So let me just check it's still in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. Let me get it up. Well, there's quite a lot of chatting going on, so let me put the link back in the Oh, I see there's one for, is that the Spanish one? Here's the Spanish one. I'll copy and put this one in. I think that's the Spanish one. And the page should link, if you go onto any of the pages, all the languages are available in the top corner. Across the little menu across the top has got all the various different languages. Make sure you've downloaded a copy for yourself. All right, so that's the first item. I'm not going to, the little tutorial will hold your hand and take you through what all of these different things mean. So I don't want to, Zeynep has also very quickly done an overview, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the way it works is that there are actually 18 competencies. However, they're broken down into smaller objectives. The competencies are at a very high level. So they're umbrella competencies. And a lot of people have said in the past, well, that's all very nice and good, but what does that mean in reality? And what does that mean within the context that my teachers will be training? So that's why it's been broken down into smaller pieces. There are approximately 96 objectives within this framework. And then they've been organized into a matrix or a grid. So if you look very carefully, then you can see the rows are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 learning areas or aspects, they're called in the framework. All right. So teachers should be able to understand what are the potential benefits of using ICT for their teaching and learning and administration. And then what is the policy position within each country in terms of what they expect teachers to do with ICT. So that's what that band is for. The second one is about curriculum and assessment. How can we use technology to support implementation of the curriculum and of assessment? The third one is pedagogy. I can never say the word, pedagogy, and teaching and learning. And the idea then is how do we use ICT to support traditional teaching? And then how can we use it to transform teaching? So teachers start using more progressive teaching methodologies rather than chalk and talk. The next one, application of digital skills, is the techie side. So how do you use Word? How do you use PowerPoint? How do you use a spreadsheet? How do you use videos, et cetera, et cetera? Organization and administration is more about how do you set up ICT within your school or within your classroom or in your community. Are people using mobiles to teach, et cetera, et cetera? So all that is the organization, and there's a bit of administration as well. How do schools use it to collect information, information systems, et cetera? And finally, teacher professional learning is about how do we make our teachers grow and develop. So once they've done the ICT CFT course, for example, what comes next? We all know that our teachers need to grow and evolve over time, and therefore teacher professional learning is important, and technology can play a role in order to achieve that. So those are your aspects, your rows. And then the UNESCO ICT CFT is very aware that you don't become an expert overnight, you grow and you develop. So therefore there are 3 columns. The first column is called knowledge acquisition, and it's basically teachers developing an awareness of what is possible and the potential benefits and so on. Knowledge deepening is more about application. So how they now start applying these various technologies and approaches within all their duties. And knowledge creation is more transformative. So we're saying here, how do we use technology to grow and develop into content developers or knowledge creation? And we don't mean just the teachers, we mean the students as well. So when you hear people talk about 21st century skills, the ability to create and build and communicate and take responsibility, but also be able for self-learning, but also be able to work collaboratively and cooperatively. All of those particular ideas will fall in the knowledge creation when we're trying to transform our learning processes using technology. So that's kind of how it works. Here is what it looks like for real. So once you get past the grid, what does that actually mean? So you can see then the first one there, aspect one, we said with the rows, understanding ICT in education. So there is the curricular goal for teaching. But then the third column is teacher competency. So this is the actual competency that they're trying to achieve. And you can see how high level it is. Articulate how their classroom practices correspond to and support institutional and or national policy. So, whoa, that's at a very high level. And then the objectives try and break it down. Identify how policy implementation is shaping classroom practice. So therefore, that particular objective is saying, so what does that mean for me as a teacher in the classroom trying to use technology? What are the things that the policy is trying to encourage me to do? Keeping in mind that policy is not all about teaching and learning. There are many other things in the policy. So the teachers need to dig down and find what are the particular statements about the vision and the mission for ICT in education within the country. All right. And the next one is identify the principles of using ICT in education in a safe and accessible manner. So it's quite different. This one is saying, if you're going to be using technology, you've got to protect yourself and your students. How do you do that? All right. And then there's some, in the last column, some examples. So all 18 competencies are broken down into around about 90 odd objectives. And then it's a very short paragraph to kind of spark imagination about how that manifests itself within the teacher training and particularly in the classroom itself. We're going to ask you to have a look a little bit closer at some of the others in a moment in the little tutorial. Which brings us to the hub. All right. And the idea then is you're not the first to go down this avenue. We've been doing this for quite some time now, almost 10 years. So we've built up a really impressive library or a database of not just resources, but units of learning. So there are whole courses that you can now take and adapt and rework. All right. So my list is a bit different. And to be honest, this list of who are the adopters, the ICT CF adopters who have shared their resources is constantly changing and growing. And some people fall out when their servers fall over, we can't find their resources anymore, etc. So it is dynamic and growing. We'll also show you, we've also got a little tutorial for you to do on that. We'll get under the bonnet properly. But the reality, the nice thing about the hub is that it has its own taxonomy, which means you can search for specific competencies that you're interested in, or you can say, no, show me the whole Kenyan ICT CFT course. I'd like to adapt the whole bang shoot. And that's what the one of our speakers, is it today? One of our previous speakers from the American University in Cairo, she's now moved across to the British University in Egypt, in Cairo. That's how they tackled it. They said, give us a fully fledged course, and then we will translate it and contextualize it for North Africa. So they chose the Kenyan one, and then they reworked it. So that's how it works. You can either drill down per competency, or you can say, no, show me the portfolio of a particular country because I believe they're closer to what we're trying to achieve. So a number of different ways of skinning the cat within the database, and you can find the resources. You don't have to ask for permission. You just take them and fix them and put out your new course. I have been going on about OERs, and Zeynep mentioned them as well. But it's very important that you understand, if you haven't been exposed to them already, we need to spend just a few moments unpacking what this thing is. So OERs then is, I think it's here. OERs are resources where the authors or the publishers have relinquished some of their control over the resources in order to try and make them shareable and more accessible. If you think very carefully of normal copyright, when you think of traditional school textbooks, for example, they are fully copyrighted. That's how the textbooks people make their money. On the one hand, all the intellectual property within the textbook is all rights reserved, meaning you can't do anything other than read the textbook. You can't copy it. You can't share your textbook technically. When you buy a copy, that's your copy, and there's no sharing. All right. So a lot of people say, well, that's not really fair, and especially as publishers have caught on to the idea, oh, let's just release a new version every year and force people to rebuy the textbook over and over and over again. So it's a kind of a model whereby it's a little bit unfair, really. And a lot of people within the education circles are saying that's a very expensive way to do things. And so therefore, Creative Commons licensing provides a much more flexible and more cost-effective way of sharing educational resources. It all hinges on this open licensing model. And on the screen at the moment are the 6 most common Creative Commons licenses. So the one at the top, you see a CC attribution or CC BY, and it basically means you can take that resource and you can do anything you like with it. You can copy it, you can share it, you can adapt it, you can translate it, whatever, but as long as somewhere along the line you have attributed, you have acknowledged where the resource comes from. That's all they want. They just want you to say, thank you, American University of Cairo, for giving us an Arabic version. We can now use this in other Arabic-speaking countries, etc. All right. And the next one, you'll notice on the right-hand side are the various permissions that you can reserve. So attribution we've discussed. No derivative simply means that you can't change it. You may use my resource, but you may not change it. All right. Which is a little bit restrictive, actually, because if you want to translate it now into Spanish and or French, and you've got an English version, but it says no derivatives, then technically you can't do that. You have to then use it in English, which is not really within the spirit of open educational resources. But it is an option you can reserve. We try and encourage people not to use that. The one at the bottom, non-commercial, kind of also makes sense. That one is saying that you can do whatever you like with my resource. You can make copies of it. You can adapt it. You can make it better suited to your teaching environment, but you may not make a profit from it. So you can't sell it because the intellectual property was offered to you for free, and your version must keep within the same must stay the same. So non-commercial. And then share alike is a lock. It basically says whatever you do with my resource, you have to share your derivatives, your versions, your adaptations with the same license. So it just locks the old license into any new versions of that resource. And on the 6 sides there, you can see the ones at the top are very open, very open. You can more or less do what you like. Whereas the ones at the bottom are more restrictive. So they're still open, but they're kind of limiting what you can do with the resource. The reason I'm showing you all this is because when you select your resources from the hub, which we're going to encourage you to do, you need to keep within the spirit of the license. So as I said, most of them are that second one. Most of the resources in the hub are CC by SA. So it would mean that you can take the resource, you can adapt it, you can even make money from yours, okay, from that, from your derivative, but you must share it with an open license, the same, CC by SA. And that's what I would say 90% of them, and then 10% of them are CC by. So there's almost no restrictive ones in the hub. The people who have been working on ICT CFT projects get it, that they've taken materials, they've adapted them, and now they're passing it on, hopefully with added values layered on top. All right, so let's just demonstrate very quickly how these OERs have grown and developed. So there you go, Guyana. In fact, I should show it to you. I should just quickly see if I can get it up on the screen. This is the grandfather, the granddaddy of all the hub resources. So it was built in 2010 to 2012. So if you look at it carefully, you can see it is showing its age by now. And as Zeynep pointed out, originally it was to be a paper-based course, but then they said, no, come, you can't teach ICT in education on paper. We need at least a CD-ROM. And in those days, CD-ROMs were very sexy. All right, so it was all built for a CD-ROM, and then the teachers at the Teacher Training College, as at Cyril Potter in Guyana, and the University of Guyana's Faculty of Education were using it like that. And the idea was, here are the various levels. Technology literacy is what knowledge acquisition was called back in those days during the 2011. And there's knowledge deepening. And you can see the various bands that we talked about earlier running down the sides. So here's curriculum and assessment. Under curriculum assessment, you see they've got 4 little study units. This one is on key competency and functional skills. Number 2 is on subject-specific tools. This one is on developing rubrics. And this one, word processor tables to create the rubrics. So that's how they did it. So they basically sat down, they looked for OERs. And if you go down here, I think is it here? References? Yeah. If you go down here, you can find all the materials that they found. In those days, it was harder. You've now got 10 years of people producing stuff. There's tons of stuff now. But in those days, they had to really sift through looking for all the OERs. Here are the ones that they used in the unit. If we go back, you'll see they've also got, here is the ICT CFT competency that they're trying to achieve. All right, so they were this is the granddaddy. Let me go back to my presentation. Okay, so they were the granddaddy and they did a lot of work. They were mostly from MCERD. I don't know if you know Guyana at all, but basically it is an implementation education agency within Guyana. Lot of initial work, but they did a good job. And then the Kenyans picked up on this some years later, and they said, oh, can't we kind of add value by loading it into an LMS? So they were the very first ones to take most of the material. They also changed the focus. They wanted it to be more knowledge deepening rather than knowledge literacy in those days, knowledge acquisition, and then they made it work for an LMS. In this case, it was Moodle. Okay, Rwanda liked it. They took the Kenyan one, and then they adapted it so that there was more of an emphasis on knowledge acquisition. The Djibouti said, cool. We want to fix it as well. They took the Kenyan one and then they fixed it for higher education, for teacher training colleges. And also the emphasis was more on providing academics with support rather than with K-12. Togo took, of course, Djibouti, it's in French. And then Togo took it and adapted it for West Africa, the French version. At that stage, we realized, we've got all these resources, but they're all over the place. So that's when ISKME and OER Commons came to the party, and they helped us develop a database with a taxonomy so that you could search for these various resources. So since then, all the resources that we come across are loaded into the hub, we call it. South Africa, we've mentioned Matthew Guinea, where they were very interesting because they were the first one to say, no, we want knowledge creation as well. So they built 56 units of study, all of which are available to you, of which a good portion, a good third of them are in that knowledge creation section. So it's more about building virtual classrooms and getting students to develop online content, to work collaboratively and all those type of extra things. So yes, they've got a good mix. And as I say, 56 units of study available. Zimbabwe took the Rwandan materials. They've been on quite a journey. So the Zimbabweans started off with a paper-based version, and it's on offer to you if you want the paper-based version. It's there. But they very quickly, like the Ghanaians, realized that it's very hard to teach ICT in education without technology. So the paper version was turned into an Android app, which is also available if you want it. And then just this year, they said, no, we want to go on to an LMS version. So they've adapted it again, the third time now, for the learner management system approach. That little picture on the screen there, that's the two panels from the app. We've mentioned Egypt, the institution that took this on was the American University of Cairo. They took the Kenyan ones and adapted it into Arabic and obviously contextualized for North Africa. And then Mozambique came to the party. They wanted a Portuguese version, and they took various bits and pieces from the hub to develop their one. Then Alexo and the Tunisian Ministry of Education worked collaboratively. They actually took, in fact, theirs is totally unique. So whereas the others are sometimes mutated babies, this one is totally unique. They came at it a completely different approach, and therefore it's very exciting and very different. But it does align beautifully because they've responded to the competencies in the framework. And then UNESCO said, whoa, there's so many versions now. Can't we just have a generic version? It would be easier for countries to actually start with a generic version rather than try and decontextualize Kenyan and South African resources. Can't we just have one which is devoid of any national context, and then countries can load the context on top of these materials? So that's been done, and that's available as the generic version. The generic version is also interesting because it does use an LMS, and Moodle offers you the ability to create a competency framework, which is cool. That's exactly what we're doing. So we have also loaded in the UNESCO ICT CFT competencies, and you can see the objectives there, into the platform. And now when students do a unit of study, then they get acknowledgement that they've achieved a competency, and they can build a bank of which competencies they have achieved. So if you're wanting to track very closely what your teachers have achieved, then we can give you that as well. We actually have the file that you can load into your own Moodle environment. Okay, so that's the hub. You've seen the framework now, you've seen the hub. And lastly is our little community, not so little actually, a very active group. They are from all around the world, Philippines, Rwanda, all those countries you've seen, plus a few extras, Oman and Lebanon and so on. So there are various practitioners who have hands-on experience with using the ICT CFT, the hub, and are there to help you when you start moving forward. So, where do I find resources on X? Then they will help you. What's a good way, what's a good activity for competency number X? Then they can give you some advice, etc. And they're very friendly, and there's quite a little bit of socializing on the app, on the group as well. So it's very non-threatening and very friendly. So yeah, that we can encourage you to also get involved there. All right, so that's, in summary, is what I'm trying to be talking about. You have 3 tools. You've got a framework. You've got a hub of resources, and you've got a little network of practitioners. And when you put the 2 together, then you can very easily put up a teacher training course on ICT and education quickly, cost-effectively, and yeah, we think it's a good deal. Right, which brings me now to what we would like you to do. So far, 3 people have been yada, 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 and I'm sure half of you have fallen asleep, and some of you probably have wandered off to get a cup of coffee, and we can't have that. That's the problem. The downside of all these virtual conferences is that half people don't listen. All right, so we're going to give you some work, some real work. All right, we have prepared 20 minutes, 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of interactive tutorial. And the first one is on the framework itself. So only the first of the tools, it'll be on the framework. And we're going to ask you to go through, get under the hood for 30 minutes, decide if this really is your thing. I mean, we obviously are sold and we've been working on this thing for ages, but is it really the thing for you? So spend a little bit of time understanding it properly. It's built into our agenda. So you'll notice on the agenda, let me bring that in. But in our agenda, we said we'll give you an online tutorial. Oh, they've given you the schnoop. They've given you 10 minutes. But let's see how you do. And I'm going to put the links to the tutorial in the chat. So let me come out of here for now. We'll start off with we'll go English one. Let me just get the link. Share. Right. If you're going to do it in English, the tutorial is now in the chat. Let's do the French one next. Here we go. French number 1. And now we've got a Spanish one as well. So let's go back to Spanish. We're going to shut up for only 10 minutes, sadly. I think you're going to struggle to really make a dent in it in 10 minutes. But especially as we are on an agenda and the fact that we started with the technical issues, let's stick to the 10 minutes. I'm going to put on the screen a clock so you can see the countdown. And I would like you to work through the tutorial, go onto use the link, work your way through the tutorial as far as you can push it, and we'll do the countdown. Let me just remind you of the question I want you to think about. The question is, in your context, which ICT competencies should be the focus of a national, or if you're an institution, institutional ICT CFT and subsequent course or courses. All right, so I want you to have a look at those 18 competencies, see how many of the 90 objectives you can have. Are there any there that resonate with your needs within your country or your institution in terms of training your teachers to use ICT in education? Okay, guys, our time is up. Let me also just show you a little trick. I just realized I didn't show you beforehand, but we're going to do another one later on. So let me just show you a little trick so that you can get the captions on the videos. All right, so let me just call up one. Yeah, I should do the Spanish one. Let me try that. All right, so if I am in the course and I want to turn the captions on, let me just go and preview it so it looks a little bit like yours. When you're in and you come to a video, then you'll notice that, I'll turn that down. You'll notice there's a CC here. So if you click on the CC, there's a little red underline, and that means they're turned on. And then you go to the cog and you say, I want subtitles, but I want auto translate. And then you can choose Spanish, for example.
The ICT CFT is a guide developed by UNESCO and its partners. It aims to outline competencies
and now you'll see that it's loading the Spanish translation on top of the English language video. All right, and that actually works for nearly all YouTube videos anyway. So if you ever feel, oh, that's an interesting English one, but I want it in Spanish, just turn on the automated subtitles. It works for French too. French, Spanish. Whether it's any good, that's another question, but at least you'll get the gist if it is a little bit rough. That's the problem of all these automated translation things. Okay, cool. All right, let's have a look now. I want to see what your initial reactions are. At the moment, I don't really know where you guys are up to, so let me put this back here. That's not that one. It's this one. Let's. Any volunteers as to whether they think this is useful or not? Can you put your hand up? I'm looking at the list of participants. And let's get some feedback from you guys. What did you think? You saw the level of the detail in the tutorial. Is this useful for your context or not? Keep in mind the question. We wanted to know in your context which of these competencies ring a bell. Or you could say, which level should we be at knowledge acquisition, knowledge deepening, or knowledge creation within your context? All right, so I want some hands, please. Use the Zoom. You go in the top right corner. There's a little, they've turned it off. Sorry, how do you do that on this version of Zoom? All right, you're just going to have to wave, and then we will turn your mic on. They've turned off the hands business. Any volunteers, please turn your mic on and let us know what is your context like and which of these competencies make sense. Fernando, you were able to turn your hand on. Yes. Talk to us.
Bueno, un saludo a Havana y agradecer primero.
So, hello from Havana. So I've been very happy to share this competency framework with you. We implemented this some years ago, but we are now looking at how this will plan out. And this may be useful for a research program that we're going to be doing with the Republic of Cuba. For all the competences, this will help us to develop competences, ICT competences, which will be necessary for our teachers. And also it's a free tool, and so this will allow us. So I think this will be a very useful reference tool, but it needs to be contextualized. Many of the materials need to be contextualized based on our characteristics, the characteristics of our countries. But I think it's shown as a different way of using content, and just as you said, so there are 90 different competences, but this is just one more way of keeping things dynamic and having a lot of practice. So I think that in 10 minutes we can already achieve a lot. And it'll allow us to. So it will allow us to improve our digital skills, especially those people who are undergoing training. And at university level, in schools, so they will be able to acquire these competences and use them in the classroom. And then we also have ongoing continuous training for in-service teachers. So this will help them to develop their digital skills. And it will also help us to generate content as well. And so we need to take ownership of this framework and the good practices. And so the 10-year experience that you have will certainly help us to take advantage of that. So I'd like to express the thanks of the government of Cuba, and I hope that we will have a lot of interchanges. I'm sorry, the sound is very bad.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. Yes, you'll see in the tutorial that one of the uses of the framework is to come up with what competencies should your teachers have. And it has been used in various countries to develop teacher standards or ICT in education teacher standards. So that might be useful for your initiative. All right, anyone else would like to give us some feedback? What is your initial thinking in terms of the framework? Do you have any queries?
The framework is extremely useful, it's relevant, and it's applicable and reliable, especially in today's context, where we are moving toward digital transformation in learning, development, and teaching. And very interestingly, what I like about it, it covers various elements of the teaching process, from the conceptualization stage, from the analysis to the development, to the design, to the implementation, and the evaluation. But interestingly, it would be useful nationally in terms of curriculum design and development, so as to ensure standardization, so as to ensure mutually agreed learning outcomes, so as to ensure quality assurance, so as to ensure equity, and of course, equality in the education process, and very importantly, access. And so to inform curriculum design for educators across different levels of education, whether it be primary, secondary, or tertiary, but of course, and to influence the design of education, of ICT in education training courses, especially as it relates to advocating for the creation of work, the creative arts, the creation in terms of licensing and copyright. You know, that is going to require legislatory approval, is going to require policy reform, is going to require technical assistance support. So for me, nationally, to inform curriculum design and to design information communication technology in terms of education training courses. And
Audrey,
of course, I see very useful for Jamaica.
Audrey, thank you very much. Yes, you might see that was one of the other things that the framework has been used for extensively, is for devising what is the curriculum for ICT in education teacher training, especially for pre-service educators. So there are numerous examples where, rather than argue over what competencies should we be using, you take the framework and then you negotiate amongst your stakeholders which are the ones we should be prioritizing. Numerous countries have come up with their own, like Zambian ICT CFT, using that approach. And you might want to do that as well. You might say, we don't want to do all 96 objectives. Let's get a priority list, and then you use it as a starting point. It is a framework. Nothing is mandatory about it. UNESCO doesn't require you to acknowledge them or anything like that. It really is your starting point from where you can then devise what is my curriculum, what are my standards, etc., etc. Audrey and Fernando, thank you. Anyone else would like to have a comment on what are their initial feelings about the framework?
Andrew, you have also talked about the framework can be used in the pre-service teacher training, but also if you look at the in-service teacher training, this is where we having this framework really integrated into our training initiatives. So it can also be used in the in-service teacher training program. So I wanted to add that.
Good. Vincent, you're very faint, so I think you need to get closer to your mic. In fact, I'm going to hand over to you now, if you don't mind. I think we need to see a practical example. The framework is all looks nice, but what does it mean when it actually needs to be applied within the country? So, Vincent, get yourself organized. I'm going to hand over to you in a moment as our case study. What we've got on our program is a case study. We want you to appreciate what are the issues when you're implementing the framework in terms of the various things. Now, Vincent is from the Rwandan Education Board. We mentioned Rwanda in the previous presentation, and they've gone quite far down this rabbit hole in terms of training teachers, using the framework to guide the development of ICT skills at the various schools. And we want him to give us, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to ask him to give us an overview of the practical implementations of using the framework.
So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, UNESCO, for inviting me to share Rwanda's experience in contextualizing the ICT Essentials initiatives, training program. So far, we started in 2015. That's when we started, and maybe you can go to the next slide. So we started actually in by then we had ICT in education policy, which was not actually it was in a draft. So when we started working with UNESCO on this instrument for ICT CFT, that was by then it was the version 2, which was developed in 2012. So we looked at how it can shape our teacher training initiative, because we had the ICT in education policy, and it was very clear because the government was wanted to use ICT to enable the economic transformation of the country. We're also looking at how we can use the ICT to enhance teaching and learning. So all those were areas where we really needed this instrument, the framework. So we looked at the where we wanted to train the teachers, because ICT was starting in school, so we had started distributing computers in school. So, but we are lacking some of the skills. So we looked at what kind of the training initiatives we can develop, and then train our teachers. So this is where the main idea came in, and we worked with the UNESCO Region Office for East African. This is where the team of UNESCO came in and looked at our existing framework. So we saw that this framework that we're using, it should be aligned to UNESCO ICT Competence Framework for teachers. So the objectives were clear. The first objective was to align the Rwanda ICT in education policy to UNESCO ICT CFT. And the second objective was to look at how the training teacher training initiative or teacher training program can be aligned to UNESCO ICT Competence Framework. And the third one was to look at different open education resources where that can support our training program. So those three objectives were very key in framing out of our competences into the program that we're trying to develop for our teachers. So the first document was ICT Essentials for Teachers course. This was a basic level, because we looked at we focused on 6 major education focus areas, and that is technology literacy, because this was the growth phase for knowledge acquisition. So because the teachers were in the entry level, so they needed to learn more of ICT, different ICT tools. You talked about the how can we use the Word, the Excel, the PowerPoint. So we looked at the basic level ones, and then from there we looked at the what kind of the units that we can integrate. So after looking at the framework, so we say that so the framework, where how many competences can we draw from the framework? So we of course this was the group was organized by UNESCO in collaboration with Rwanda Basic Education Board. So we looked at the different institutions. We invited different partners, different education and training institutions. So, and we came up with 14 units of study. So the first in-service teacher training curriculum was composed of 14 units, and these all 14 units. So we looked at after coming up with the different units, then we had also to look at different competences for each unit. So our teacher training program is designed in a way that fits our local context. So we looked at the different, because we needed to train the teachers on how on how they can integrate ICT in teaching and learning, but also looking at how the curriculum, the national curriculum, is structured. So we had also to look at different standard, the formats. So which formats we use, and then so that this format is well understood by our teachers. So we looked at different formats. So after identifying the formats and identifying the 14 units of study, then we also had to look at different OERs, the open education resources that were supposed to support the teacher training program. So that's when we looked at different countries that have developed their teacher training program. So Andrew talked about the Kenyan ICT CFT, the Guyana. So we looked at how they developed their teacher training program, and then we looked at what fits us or in our context. And from there, after identifying those OERs from different countries, so we looked at those OERs that fits our national context. So all these resources were really integrated in ICT Essentials for Teachers course. So and then after developing this ICT Essentials for Teachers course, and then we looked at how this course was supposed to be validated, because this was in the development process. So after the course was we looked at different UNESCO competencies. They were integrated, the OERs, and now we had to validate this content. So the main aim of the validation was actually we invited different institutions because we had developed, but we needed inputs, we needed feedback from the different training institutions, so that we can have a tangible and the training program which was really fit. So the first in-service teacher training, so it went into validation process, and the discussion mainly focused on the licensed open education resources, because it was something that was new to our training program. So no one was actually aware of the open education resources, how it can be contextualized into our own program. So the main discussion of the validation mainly focused on that. So there were the ministry officials, and so the course was validated. So the first course was validated by the ministry officials and then other education partners. So, and this course was published also, as you've seen through the presentation by Andrew and Zeynep. The course was published on UNESCO Oer Commons Hub. So, but after validating the course, so we decided that how can we pilot, because we needed to pilot the course. So we're in battle of how this course can be piloted. So in piloting, we selected few schools to be where the course was piloted. But before we selected the few schools, we had to select the teachers, the e-tutors. So these are the teachers. So we train the few teachers. We started with 11 e-tutors, and then after the 11 went on to train others. So we started with 120 e-tutors across the country. So these e-tutors were trained by UNESCO. So we passed through the course, and because the course was developed and validated, so the course was developed into e-learning platform. So much of the work actually we spent much of the work training the e-tutors, because we are planning to use the cascade model where we train the few, and then the few goes to their respective schools to train other teachers on this on the framework. So that's how we managed to cascade this program into different schools. So at first it was 50 schools, and the second pilot, it targeted 120 schools. So we had now a pool of the teachers who were coming out, who were really taking the course to their schools. And so from the results of the piloting, we saw that it was really very important for us in the ministry to develop a more advanced course. So actually, as I said, we developed two teacher training programs. So the first program targeted the entry level. It was for technology literacy gross level of the knowledge acquisition. And now, after the piloting the first teacher training program, so we decided that it was necessary for us to develop in more the advanced one, which was targeting actually the intermediate skilled teachers who were supposed to advance more skills. It was looking at the different skill set of knowledge acquisition, then also looking at different skills. So in that, in 2018, when UNESCO was publishing the third version of the UNESCO ICT Competency Framework for teachers, so we were lucky, we were among the few countries that actually adopted very quickly. Because we had done pilot, and these pilots were really successful. We saw how the teachers used the framework to integrate ICT in their teaching. Different resources were developed, and this also goes with the government plan of the distribution of computers and the internet into school. So the schools were really grasping this program. So the program was published. So we saw that there was a lot of demand to develop more for advanced one. So we decided to develop the advanced ICT Essentials from the basic one. So the advanced actually targeted the UNESCO version 3, because if you look at the two versions, they are kind of skill set that a teacher should have. So, but in the second teacher training program, which was the advanced one, we tried to narrow down the unit of study, because the first one had 14 units of study. So in the advanced one, we had only 10 units of study, and also this was based on the different consensus from different participants who attended the course. We asked the teachers what kind of the competences they would want to be integrated in the advanced one. So we had to do a kind of a survey to understand more of what the users, of what the users wanted in the advanced one. So basically, we looked at different recommendations that was drawn from the original ICT Essentials for Teachers course, which was the entry one. So we had the e-tutors who participated and also trained their fellow teachers in different districts. Also, we had the ministry officials who were involved in the development of the framework, and also the University of Rwanda College of Education as the stakeholders who were also aware of how the scope of the first course. So all the recommendations were put together, and then we say that in the advanced ICT Essentials, it should also follow the same steps that were used to develop the basic one. So, of course, the advanced one focused on the knowledge deepening, knowledge creation of the levels of the UNESCO ICT Competency Framework for teachers. So it focused on those levels, and also we looked at the different education resources that also were supposed to be to be integrated in our teacher training framework. So we looked at different OERs, we looked at different multimedia elements that needs to be included in the framework. So we looked at how the different videos that were supposed also to be used in the original version. So all these were put together and also integrated into their advanced ICT Essentials for Teachers course.
Sorry, Vincent, 5 minutes.
So I think you can see on the screen. So on your left, so this is where we have the unit of study, and then on your right we have the unit competences. So the unit competences actually were drawn from the UNESCO ICT CFT version 3. I think you can see the objective code. So we are linking the unit of study with the unit competences. So for example, in this unit 1, use interactive whiteboard to support teaching and learning. So the unit competence would be described and demonstrate the use of common hardware. So, and also if you look at where we got these unit competences from the UNESCO competence, and also with the code. Can you go to slide 12? So the framework, actually the teacher training initiative, the curriculum looks like that. So where we have this is I talked about the standard formats because we had to we use the UNESCO ICT CFT into our, but when we were developing, we looked at the standards that the format of the standards that which was familiar to our teachers, because it's all about the context. So this is how our national syllabus or curriculum is designed. So you have the topic area, you have the subtopic area. For example, if you take this unit, for example, this is the unit of the study, user assistive technology for inclusive and special needs education. So this was developed a sample unit. So you have the unit title, and then you have the key competence where it is, and it is showing where we drawn it from the UNESCO competence framework. So in our national curriculum, we have the learning objectives. So in the learning objectives, you have 3 parts. So you have knowledge and understanding, you have skills, attitudes. So, and then you have also the part for the content and also the learning objectives. So I think Andrew understands this kind of format because he was actually helping us to come up with this kind of format, which was understood by the teachers. So we developed different learning objectives. So this is the main standard formats we used for Rwanda, and if you go to UNESCO Hub for OERs, you'll find our content are designed like this. So for countries that want to see, maybe they can look at maybe on what we have done. Maybe they can also try to internalize it in their own context. So that's the journey we have went through. So far now, as we talk, around 24,000 teachers have gone through these 2 programs. So the first program is ICT Essentials, which will look at the basic literacy level. So the teachers need to pass through this kind of the program. So it's a program where every teacher needs to go through, and then from that they go to the advanced one. So we have developed different training materials, we have done through different assessment. So we have done a lot. in terms of the program. So we are very happy to use the program, and this program has already internalized into our training program. So even an institution that wants to cut out the training program, so they use our framework, so they can change, they can change, they can do some changes. But in our training program, this is we are using the UNESCO kind of framework. So what did we gain? What did we gain from this, from implementing the ICT CFT? As a ministry, our staff were able to be capacitated by the UNESCO, so we can now design our own framework, because UNESCO trained our staff, our ministry staff were trained through the process of developing the framework, so we have also the departments for ICT in education in our institution that is designed to look at how different ICT in education activities are being implemented. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Maybe we'll keep on sharing the expertise and as we continue this presentation. So without taking much of the time, thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Let me just very quickly show you what they've done. Vincent mentioned two different programs. They've got their ICT Essentials for Teachers, and this is it available on the hub. So you can see all the various different sections. This one's the orientation. Let's turn the editing off so it looks nice. Because it's on the hub, it's all available to you if you want to use it. So they've got, let's go back. They've got one on computer basics. They've got spreadsheets, word processing, ICT and policy, ICT and curriculum, etc. And it's all pulling directly from the ICT CFT. Vincent mentioned they spent a lot of time getting their facilitators to be trained up to provide online support. Here's one of them here, giving a little introduction to the section that he was looking after, Unit 9. The other course that Vincent has mentioned is the ICT Advanced ICT Essentials. So they've used version 3 to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole and use some of those knowledge creation items. All right, we're going to have a look at the database and see what's available, which you could use after the break. We're going to give you, let's look at the 20 minutes. So we'll see you in 20 minutes. In the next half, we're going to look at the free resources that you can access and use. All right. So what are we doing this afternoon? So the trick now is you've understood, hopefully, how the framework works. You did a little tutorial, or hopefully you can go back and have another look at it later for a bit more detail. And we've even had Vincent come in and explain how it shaped two of their courses, the ICT Essentials course and the Advanced ICT Essentials course. And now we're hoping that you're thinking, all right, so I've got the framework, I can make a selection of the various competencies I want to prioritize. But now once we've done that and we have a Cuban ICT CFT, for example, how do we now develop a course around those particular priority competencies that we've found? So the program for the second half is to investigate the hub. So earlier, let me show you how to get there. The easiest way is to just go to OER Commons, Hubs, UNESCO, or if you can't remember that, you can go to the OER Commons main page and look for the Hubs link, and then you can just scroll to the bottom because UNESCO is with a U. We're normally at the bottom. When you go to your hub, into UNESCO Hub, it looks like this. All right, so what is it? It is basically a database with a front end which allows you to look for these open educational resources. So these ladies here were at the Cyril Potter College of Education in Georgetown in Guyana. Admittedly, a long time ago, they're probably seasoned teachers by now, but you can see there is already an LAC region feel to the whole thing. And when you come onto the UNESCO Hub, you'll see there are some propaganda videos. I think you've seen them already in the tutorial. There is a discussion about how the ICT Essentials in Rwanda unpacked. So if you're interested in what Vincent said and how they did it, there's a nice little video on that as well. And then you come to this particular grid. So this looks vaguely familiar. Here's your knowledge acquisition, your knowledge deepening, your knowledge creation, understanding ICT in education, curriculum and assessment, pedagogy, application of digital skills, organization and administration, and teacher professional learning. So this is what we were talking about earlier. You can see this is the framework in structure. And within each of these cells, it tells you how many resources we have available on the hub to teach that particular competency. So for example, if we're looking at application of digital skills, there are 29 resources. And when we say 29 resources, we don't mean a little document or something. We mean units of study. Okay, so nearly everyone has come up with some basic ICT skills training for their course, and therefore you can find 29 of them in there. So if I click on there, you can see the results. There are the various bits and pieces. So the first four, I know them well. So the first four I can see come from that generic ICT CFT course that we mentioned in the second presentation. This one here I know is from South Africa. I mentioned that the Zimbabweans originally made a whole load of paper-based versions. Here is this one on hardware. This one here is from REB. This is also from Rwanda. These blue ones, blue and yellow, are Rwandan ones. This one here is from Zimbabwe. I told you they went on to an LMS. This is their LMS version. Here's that Guyana one that we asked you to have a look at right at the beginning, and so on. So you can see there's tons of stuff that you could adapt. If you look carefully, you can see the license. Here's CC by SA. Basically, it's saying that you can use the resource without asking for permission, without paying any royalties or anything like that. All you have to do is make sure that you attribute the UNESCO generic authors and that you share your version with a similar license, CC by SA. There you go. All right, we're going to go under the bonnet in a moment and understand how this hub works. We're going to use the same idea of a tutorial. But before we do that, we have a guest speaker who's going to give us a particular perspective from Brazil. So let's hand over to, let me stop sharing, to Tel Emil. I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us about the UNESCO ICT CFT and OERs and what you guys have got up to at your institution.
All right, so welcome everyone to this, and welcome to me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Zeynep, for pointing out this event to me. So I was asked to speak a bit about what's happening in the region in terms of OER in Latin America. And I have only a few minutes, which I think should be appropriate, just to give us a general panorama. First, of what we've done, I think, so far collaboratively in the region. And then I'd like to point out some trends that we've seen over the years. And then finally, I'd like to point out some initiatives which I think are particularly useful, particularly for those that are in Spanish-speaking countries, because these are normally harder to find. And so I'll try to point some of these initiatives that I think are particularly valuable. I've used the framework a lot in the past. I haven't been using the framework recently, but I follow it. And it's not something that we implement here, but we're looking with keen interest into how it's integrated with OER now. And the OER Commons Hub is a very useful resource, which one I was just shown to you now. I'll try to speak a little bit slower because of the translators. I normally don't do a very good job with that, so I'll try my best. Let me share my screen real quickly. I don't have a presentation. I actually just want to show you some things that are available on the web and things that might be of use to you. The first thing I wanted to point out is that in 2017, in preparation for the second OER World Congress that happened in Ljubljana in Slovenia, we had a regional meeting that was hosted here in Sao Paulo for the Americas, and we had lots of representatives from the Caribbean region and all of Latin America, and we discussed a lot of the priorities and the things that we thought were important for the region, and this is available on our UNESCO chair site. The report for this was published later on and presented a lot of interesting challenges for the region. So this is something that we've, as a region, have been thinking together for a little while, at least since the Second World Congress, but even on the First World Congress when we had our meeting for South America in Rio de Janeiro back in 2012. So this was one of the first and most important, I think, meetings we had. But we also had recently sponsored with UNESCO here, Brazil, and with support from UNESCO, we had it ended up being more of a Latin American meeting rather than just a Mercosur meeting in 2018. And we invited a lot of folks from the region and from outside of the region to think about what were the particular challenges that we face. And this resulted in a document that you can consult in Spanish and English and in Portuguese on our site. That is kind of a recommendation plan and also a strategy document. It tries to point out what what we can in the region as teachers, as librarians, as professors, as researchers, what can we do as a community to advance OER, and also what we expect and we hope that governments can do in the region to address specific challenges for our region. And we know that even though it's kind of a vast region, there are some interesting challenges that we face linguistically, culturally, and in terms of our educational system that we felt like we needed to discuss regionally. So this recommendation document, it's fairly short, but very to the point, and it was the product of work in the region. I really would recommend you take a look at it if you can. And we are planning, hopefully, to have a new policy workshop for the region in the near future that would get us all together to think about these issues locally as well. Another interesting initiative that I think it's a bit of a pause, but it's something that I would encourage you to visit and to know more about and contribute if you can, is that the Open Education Global organization has what they call the Nodo Latam, or a Latam node for Latin America, trying to talk about what happens in open education in Latin America. And they have an interesting panel of per country reports for a number of countries. And I would encourage you to take a look. Some of the information is not incredibly up to date, but they are very, very interested in having people collaborate. And so they kind of present just a general idea of what's happening in some of the countries, and you can find some interesting stories highlighted and some information on professional development. And even though it's not a huge resource, I think it's an interesting way for us in the region, for Latin America, to get in touch with each other and to collaborate through an organization that's already established. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. So let me get to the more important point of talking about the region itself. So the reason I think I get to speak about these things is because we're often monitoring what's happening in Latin America for OER. I've been doing this for quite a while now. And one of the things that we decided to do over the past year was to try to update information about Latin America to get some real data of what's happening in terms of organizations, of services. Services are repositories, referatories, content sources, things that offer open educational resources, as well as policies in the region. And so last year, we put a consortium of people from different countries, from Uruguay, from Colombia, from Argentina, Chile. We got together and we decided to map the region, or to increase what was available on the OER World Map. If you don't know what the OER World Map is now, I'd really seriously encourage you to visit. It's a great project that tries to map what's happening in terms of OER around the world in all of these categories, from services to organizations to policies, events. And it becomes a really big, huge searchable database of content, of people that are working with OER and open education, of institutions that are working with open education and open educational resources. And it becomes a really great place to find information. And so last year we updated the map for all of Latin America, and it's a pretty up-to-date source on what's available in the region. You'll find that a lot of countries are blank, and this is because we many times couldn't find information, even in cooperation with folks from the region. Some countries just don't have a lot of developments around OER and open education that can be mapped in these categories. But the good thing is that anybody can contribute. So if you feel like your country is not represented or your region is not represented, you can become an ambassador and you can join in and try to update this information. But this is a very up-to-date map. The last update that we did was just mid-2021. So a lot of things that you'll find here are incredibly up-to-date. And you can see just by looking at the map that some countries are better represented in terms of their activities than others. There's a lot of disparity in the region. More important for us, I think it's clear that some countries just simply don't have OER as part of their agenda. It's not part of, even though they might have an ICT policy or they're working towards professional development, ICT and so forth, they just don't have it as part of their agenda. So let me just highlight, I think, 3 important trends, which I think could really help in understanding this scenario of OER in the region. And this is something we've seen for the past maybe 5 or 7 years that we've done some reports on this. There's still a lot of confusion, and this is important for you to know, between what is free and what is open. So a lot of times people will put content online and repositories online that have content available that you can see or you can download, but they don't have an open license. They're not thought through as open educational resources. They don't have the right frameworks for this. And there's a lot of confusion, a lot of work that needs to be done by people using these repositories in identifying whether there's an open license, their formats that are open, if it actually has terms of use that specify that the content is open for use and reuse. So that's a lot of work for us. A lot of things are still very free, but not necessarily open. Most of the initiatives in the region are still government initiatives. The big points of reference in the region are governmental portals for either basic or higher education. There are not a lot of initiatives by private entities, NGOs and the like. There just simply aren't. A lot of these government initiatives are also institutional repositories from public universities. So you have a lot of open access materials like scientific articles and things of the sort, reports, but not necessarily a lot of educational content. So this limits a bit of the things that you'll find in the region, and we need to encourage different types of initiatives to show up. The final thing is that a lot of repositories don't last very long. So even governmental initiatives, very large ones, tend to last for a period of 4 or 5 years, and then they just kind of disappear. So it's very hard to keep this information up to date in the region. That said, we still have a very good tradition that's not similar to other countries and other regions in the world, where we have very good national repositories that are very well structured around OER. And that's very, very, very good to have as an example. So I'll just try to give you just 3 examples or 4 examples of things that I think are particularly interesting. One of them continues to be a really good example is Educar from Argentina. And of course, they focus their content in Spanish. And Educar has a lot of resources for all levels of education. And they're all very well organized and categorized. And you'll find that the content is very well labeled in terms of what kind of licenses you can use for the content, and whether you can or cannot use them according to specific licenses. So you'll see here on the bottom, they have a specific category for licenses, making it very clear whether you can use it or not. And most, if not all, of the content is Creative Commons licensed. Another really interesting and very traditional repository comes from Uruguay, based on Plan Ceibal, which has been around for quite a while. It's associated with an ICT integration project for laptops for children. And they have a specific repository for OER. It's called REA Ceibal, or Repositorio de Recursos Abiertos. And they have a lot of content that was not only designed by experts, but also designed by teachers. And so it shows how we can create these resources together, more than just making them available, but actually co-creating these resources. So I would encourage you to visit that as well. And the final example I want to point out is Red Aprende from Colombia. It's part of Colombia Aprende. It's a larger initiatives, and they have, again, a lot of categorized resources in very different aspects, from videos and text and so forth. And they also have, if you follow them, they'll be very clearly labeled in terms of the licenses that you can use. In this case, again, a Creative Commons license. The reason I show these repositories is not only because resources in Spanish are harder to find than in English, and repositories are harder to find, but also because I think that as you're thinking about teaching teachers about OER, it's great to show examples of repositories that do a good job in terms of showing clearly the licenses. And actually, you can see repositories that are structured around the idea of open educational resources. And so these are three good examples. And to wrap up, because I think I'm already over my time, I wanted to show just 2 places you can go for courses. So materials that are really interesting for you to use with teachers and whomever you might be working with to teach about OER. Proeva is an initiative from Udelar, from Uruguay, and they have a number of courses on authorship, copyright, OER, open educational practices in Spanish. There are other countries that have done this in the past, like Nicaragua and Costa Rica, but some of these resources are no longer available, or they're a little bit older. So Proeva always has very up-to-date courses on their site from Udelar, and you can find them open for teachers to use, whether you want to spend some time using some materials for open educational practices, or what is OER, very basic courses. You can, of course, download them, remix them. They're based on Moodle. You can take them with you and put them somewhere else if you wish. And this is a great resource to have continued education in the area of OER in Spanish, if you wish. We also have our own in Portuguese. Our courses are remixed by a lot of people in the region, so we produce them in Portuguese, and then we share them with other folks to translate them to Spanish. And we have the Open Education Initiative here in Brazil, where this course is available, and we're always interested in developing partnerships around this. Our courses are used by ministries and organizations from around the region. And if you feel like you need some support in that, we can always help as well. So I hope this was a very short but clear introduction to sort of the panorama of the region, and I'm more than happy to stay here and continue conversation. But I know you have a full agenda, and I wish you a good workshop from now on.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from our participants? If you do have a question, Vincent, yes.
I wanted to ask Tel if it is possible maybe to share the content on the hub. I don't know if it is there on the hub, so that maybe it can benefit a lot of people, because the hub now is accessible to many people.
This specific, I'd be glad to make a little presentation of this and put it and share with the folks at UNESCO if they feel like it's something they can pop up there. Yeah, I'd be glad to do it. No problem at all.
That would be really very useful. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Napoles says, thank you. It's certainly difficult to find these resources in Spanish. Your presentation has been very helpful. And Asiata says, are there any of the resources translated into English from those that you've shown us?
Yeah, I commented here. It's a valid question, because one of the things we always complain about is that we don't find content from other regions translated to Spanish or Portuguese. But we also don't do a very good job, because normally we don't have time or funding, is that we don't translate our very good resources to English as well. So it's a way to give us visibility on the cool things that we do. So a lot of times what you'll find in these portals is not translated content into English, but aggregated content from other places in English, particularly when they're about teaching English. So these portals are normally not very good at having multiple languages as well.
All right. And Marva says, into Dutch for the Dutch Caribbean.
I'm sure with the appropriate funding, people will be glad to help.
It's always the case. It's actually a big... when we say OERs are great because you can adapt them, and then we just say and translate them, normally it's an enormous enterprise. So yes, all right.
What we've done in the past, just a final comment, is that a lot of times we'll do crowdsourcing for this, and so all of our videos, when we do videos, we do subtitling in at least 3 languages, so English, Portuguese, and Spanish. But it is, when you're doing courses and the like, you normally need a lot of resources. Or what we do now with like the folks with Proeva, one of the courses we did in Portuguese, we worked with them and they've translated and adapted the resources to Spanish, so we have very similar courses. But these are specific points where we can actually work together. That's a good idea to do it if we can.
Cool. All right. Tel, thank you very much. I think it's very important to hear what's going on in the region, and yeah, especially the big language question. Often that's a stumbling block for OERs. Is it available in a language that is meaningful for that context? For example, the Dutch Caribbean. Okay, thank you very much. All right.
Hello.
Hi, Vincent. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe. I want to suggest something to UNESCO. Maybe they have to look at this. Maybe if it is possible, because the hub is growing, so it's better also if it can accommodate different languages. I think maybe they have to look at this initiative because it's really growing. I think it's important to have all these kind of contents in different languages.
I do know, Zeynep can correct me, but I do know the emphasis now is trying to get away from ICT CFT OER projects in English-speaking countries and rather start tackling the others. I know French is a priority at the moment, but yes, as you say, Vincent, I think the more languages, the better.
If I may, Andrew, we're not trying to get away from working with English-speaking countries. We really want to work with English-speaking countries, right, and all of the English-speaking countries in this meeting, of course. But we're also trying to include materials and colleagues that are non-English-speaking in the view of ensuring multilingualism on the hub. So it has been an issue that we have discussed. There's another point that's been under discussion is we're trying to see how we can make the hub, not just the materials, but also the hub itself in other languages. So that's another point. And I think the presentations that we've had with Vincent, your presentation on the work in Rwanda shows how far and how in depth it can go in terms of materials development. And Tel's presentation shows the different complexity of initiatives going on in OER in the Latin America region, and I think it is really time now that we look at different language issues. Now, as we can see in this discussion, time and space has changed since COVID started. We're all sitting here at different time zones talking about different things and sharing knowledge at the same moment, instantaneously, and looking at links and moving forward. So we have to, this is a general thing that we'll have to do in all of our work, is to change we come to terms with the changed, the dimensions we're working in. And in those dimensions, it's language will take another role. And it's something that's in the OER recommendation, and something that comes out in the teacher training materials in the CFT. And even within the CFT, language will have to become an issue to be addressed. So I think we're touching a huge issue here. But thank you very much for bringing it up.
And we're going to hear more from Zeynep later in the second part activity schedule. We're going to be talking about overview global activities for the year and what the priorities will be, etc. So we'll get a bit more on that. Right. I think enough talking. I think it's time for you guys to do some more work. So we've got a second interactive session that we would like you to have a look at. You have slightly longer this time. I'm not sure why I only gave you 10 minutes for the first one, but you do have 20 minutes for the second one. This one is on the hub. So I've given you a very high-level overview of how the hub works. The tutorial will go into more detail and be more precise. So I'm going to do the same trick again. I'm going to load into the chat the 3 language versions of the second tutorial. However, on the screen at the moment is the question I want you to think about as you're going through the tutorial and the hub. Okay, so it's going to encourage you to dig around and look for things specific to your context. So did you find anything useful on the hub? Okay. How much adaptation do you think is necessary to align with your context? It's come up many times during the session. Context is king. All right. It's all very well to pull these OERs from the hub, but can you contextualize them, either language, but it goes beyond language. Is the language pitched correctly for your teachers? Are there local examples? Do we have little case studies from your island or from your country? How do we make it feel that this is not some generic course that you've just downloaded, but it talks specifically to real teacher needs and their requirements to grow? All right, so to keep that in mind, I'll put the question in the hub, in the chat in a moment. Let me now load in so in the chat then are the 3 links to the different languages. They're all the same tutorial. Can you now spend 20 minutes going through the tutorial? I'm going to put the question in the chat as well so that you can keep that in mind as you're working. Right, off you go. Can you keep working? And I'll give you a verbal countdown. Okay, there we go. All right. What do people think so far? Remember the question was there anything that resonates with your context? Would anyone like to volunteer? You can put your hand up again if you would like to have a say. Please have your say. Already in the chat, there were some interesting things sent to me. For example, is there any materials available for higher education, etc.? And the answer to that one is, keep in mind that the competency framework for teachers is really for educators in general, but the examples tend to be for primary and secondary educators, but you don't have to go with those examples. You can actually use the competencies and the objectives for higher education academics as well. So keep that in mind. What do people think? Any hands up? Audrey, you had an opinion last time and it was a good one. Let's hear what you think this time.
Well, I must tell you, the hub is a reservoir of rich resources, and I see quite a number of them that I could use. But what stood out for me and which I was looking for was ICT and assessment. And I found one with Kenya and how to develop rubrics. Rubrics for assessment, right? Especially using ICT. And there was another one from Zimbabwe, ICT Basic Essentials, because what you find that one of the major gap and problem that we had in Jamaica when we had to resort to online learning, to e-learning, that many teachers were not competent in the basic computer skills, didn't know how to develop a PowerPoint, didn't know how to use Excel, didn't know how to use Zoom, WebEx, Google Classrooms, and Microsoft Teams, the various learning platforms, so as to deliver and to facilitate and to enable learning. And so this was a major impediment that resulted in learning loss. It came at great cost because the technical assistance was not there, the institutional strengthening was not there, the capacity development was not there, the organizational development. So these are essential courses and resources here that we can use and adapt and replicate and integrate in our system here in Jamaica. But I was really impressed with the one about the assessment and the one about the curriculum design.
All right, that sounds good. Let me also just demonstrate this. This is in the hub, and you might find this an easy entry because sometimes it's a little bit daunting when you just see how many resources there are And then you might say, yeah, but Zimbabwe is a very different environment from what we work in, and so on. So in amongst all of those items is the ICT Essentials for Teachers, the generic version. We have mentioned it before, and here it is. And you'll see that it was done just as COVID was breaking, and therefore there was a big demand for emergency remote teaching. So a whole load of the units available, you can see them there, are on very basic ICT skills, which teachers might need in order to teach remotely. So those ones are all identified as you go through. You can see here ICT and education policy awareness, etc., ICT for teaching and learning, responsible use of ICT in schools, and so on. So if we look at one like this one, for example, number 4, it has to be very careful because the curriculum, for example, in Kenya is very different from, say, in Jamaica. All right. So how would you contextualize this? Because that was the question. Does it need a lot of contextualization, or is it something you can just adapt? Some of them are pretty straightforward. How to use Word for teaching and learning is pretty basic. But how do you use technology to support curriculum, for example, will require some serious customization. So this one, for example, is the generic version. You can see it says, welcome, here's our outcomes. We're linked to that particular competency. And then you'll notice that it doesn't actually talk about specific objectives or anything like that because it's trying to be generic. So how can technology help you at a very high level in terms of the official curriculum? And there's a couple of activities to get them to engage. There is a little case study. In this case, it's from South Africa. It explains how it links to the curriculum, etc. The next item in here is the curriculum objectives and the standards. So it doesn't particularly point at any one, but it talks about them in general. So what are general objectives and what are specific objectives? And how do we handle 21st century skills within the curriculum, etc.? So this is the next piece, and so on. All right. And then there's a little assignment to help people engage with the content. Now, if I was coming from a Jamaica point of view, I would then also include in here links to the Ministry of Education's website where all the digital syllabi are available, where there is discussion about the assessment practices, etc., etc. So then I would make it more specific and more useful for, say, Jamaican teachers. Someone earlier asked for the idea about, I need stuff on assessment. That is one of the ones that they cover here. Let me see if I can find it quickly. OERs, ICT to support assessments. So in this one here, it talks about a general introduction, different types of assessment, diagnostic, formative versus summative. Tell us more about summative, what tools are available, etc. How does assessment work on an LMS? What would be a good assessment strategy? How do you develop rubrics? Audrey said she found something from, I think it was Kenya, but here it's been made a little bit simpler. You would need to contextualize it. How do you use e-portfolios, and so on. All right, and then there's a little assignment where they have to go on and use third-party assessment apps such as Kahoot, Plickers, Quizzes, Socrative, etc. All right, so I'm hoping that when you looked at the hub, you began to get a feel of the breadth of what is available out there. If you're finding the hub a little bit too big, then always zero in on this generic one, and then you can very quickly adapt this and contextualize it without having to strip out bits from other countries. All right, what's the time? Okay, no, we're doing all right. Any other queries, questions, observations about the hub and the resources available on the hub?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm from Jamaica.
Jodianne, yes.
I actually left a chat But I work in the public library system, and looking at the hub, it is very, very rich. So I'll agree with Audrey. And one of the things I was looking at is to the right to at least make the link available on our online public access catalog.
Yes.
The institution is also responsible for over 800 school libraries. And we really think that this would be very, 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 very useful for teachers.
Please, I'll put the link in the chat. Yes, let teachers know this is available. Admittedly, the UNESCO framework and the hub are really, really pointed at developers and ministry officials, etc., people who have as their responsibility the training of teachers and specifically trying to get them to incorporate ICT into their teaching and learning. Some teachers might come in and go, oh, I don't really understand the link, because it's not really talking to teachers, it's talking to people who are responsible for teacher education. All right, so keep that in mind. They might go, oh, how is this relevant to me? But Jody, that would be great. I'll put the link in. Any other queries, questions, observations about what you experienced when you looked at the hub? All right. In that case, I'll work through the any comments in the chat, but I'm going to hand over to Zeynep, who's going to do the last major section, which is on a overview global activities for 2022.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen very quickly. I don't have a very long presentation. I just want to share 2 slides with you, just to give you an idea of what the framework is that we're working on, and then I will go into the activities foreseen for 2022. Basically, this, you've already seen this. What you see on the screen is what's in the recommendation, the main area. And the activities that we have foreseen are in this framework, and that's why I'm showing you this screen. The first part of the recommendation is on capacity building. So it's really about awareness raising, and it's about developing capacities for creating, using, accessing OER and openly licensed platforms. It's activities such as the one we're having right now. The second one is actually policy, but on this table it's way down, it's the third one down, and it's about procurement. It's about policy that supports OER. And it's about guidelines and standards and incentives for teachers, and then alignment with other policies related to OER, such as open access, open data, etc. The next one is on the way the document works, is the quality and multilingual inclusive OER. It goes back to what we were talking about with TEL, the fact that there's a lot of OER in English. It's not because OER, it's not just OER, a lot of materials in the internet are in English. So this is just a reflection of what's there online, period. Also, we've been doing a lot of work on accessible OER, so work that deals with persons with disabilities and accessibility issues, and then quality assurance. So how does quality assurance and quality issues go into it? Sustainability, in a nutshell, sustainability, you can just say, is about how to make sure that it's not teachers and learners that shoulder the costs of learning materials, in a nutshell. And then international cooperation. These are the areas that we've been working in since it was adopted. In the next year, we will be doing three major activities around these areas. First of all, those colleagues that are from national commissions, I'm sure you know that UNESCO normative instruments have a monitoring process that requires them to have a monitoring happen every 4 years. So it will be the first monitoring process will be launched this year. In the upcoming executive board, there will be a discussion in the CRE Commission. I'm sorry for those who are not part of the UNESCO intergovernmental process, but this is a commission that deals with normative instruments, and there is a draft questionnaire that will be published, and the member states will be invited to in the CRE Commission, the executive board, to provide inputs to this and or to adopt it with or without modifications. Once this document is adopted, the procedure is that it goes to all the member states by a circular letter. And this questionnaire will ask countries about what they've been doing, what sorts of activities, what they've done for the implementation of the recommendation. This will be a major. We will be doing awareness raising about this over the next year on this monitoring process. The other two areas that we'll be looking at is to develop guidelines. The first set of guidelines will be on policy development, and the policy guidelines will not be just on the policy element, but about what are the different policy elements of policy that have to be incorporated into different levels of institutions and governments to support OER. So this includes, for example, policies at institutional level that have to do with incentives for teachers. This includes, for example, that are at the higher education level, whether there would be, teachers or instructors would get credit for their careers, the same way they do for academic journals. Would creating OER be something that could be considered as in the same area or similar? In terms of for another example is procurement, or what kind of procurement rules would be perhaps supportive of ensuring OER. That, for example, the biggest issue that has been discussed is about, and this has been discussed since 2012 and been in all UNESCO declarations, is whether governments have policies in place that say that when educational materials are developed with public funds, they would be made available on an open license. The principle being that the citizens have already paid for the materials once through their taxes, and then therefore they would be paying for it two times if they were not licensed. Those are the sorts of issues that are discussed. At the same time, we've started already with a draft that will be in one region in West Africa that we will be internationalizing, and we will be also starting to work on the capacity building guidelines that will also look at different areas, not just the first area, which is capacity building, but how to integrate, for example, ensuring that the OER that's developed is inclusive for persons with disabilities and those that are, for example, not in areas that are well served by broadband networks, etc. And how to ensure multilingualism into it, how to put into place sustainability models, etc. So we're trying to look at it from a comprehensive point of view. Those are the three main activities that are going on this year. At the same time, we have the OER Dynamic Coalition, which is a coalition which was launched in 2020, just at the same time as the COVID pandemic was announced. And this is a group that basically you're all welcome to it, and we'll put the address into the chat right after right during this meeting, and you're welcome to join. And this is a group that's put into place to share knowledge, to share activities that are happening between with different parties, the different stakeholders, and also for UNESCO to share information on what it's doing in different areas. For example, the next event of the OER Dynamic Coalition is during Open Week, which is an international celebration that goes on online. It's been going on for over 10 years. It's the week of 10 March, and there are a number of different activities going on. I'll put the link in, and one of the activities that's happening is a webinar of 1 hour, and it's particularly on this part, on quality. This time we're organizing it on quality and quality assurance in an hour. So this is a moment where we have 3 or 4 speakers that give a point of view on what are the different initiatives and the ways that this point is being addressed at the international level. In this one, for example, we have someone talking from a traditional quality assurance higher education point of view, someone talking about it from a metadata AI point of view and what's being done in terms of quality there, another one talking about peer reviews, I think. And so we come at the same topic, but from different angles, and we try to have a geographical and gender perspective on it also. So that is basically what's happening in OER. In terms of the ICT Competency Framework for Teachers, we're very excited to continue working with you, and you've seen the project, so we'll be continuing the hub, and we're very excited. If you're interested in further information or working on this further, we are available, and I think and our colleagues in Kingston and Havana also, of course, and we're here to support you. We will be looking more also this year into the use of the CFT for both the youth training, not just in formal education, but in non-formal education, and also look at teacher training or instructor training for coding, which is going to be another area we're going to be looking into. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be looking at the issue here of language, and it was brought up in this discussion of ensuring that the materials are available to the extent possible in different languages. As Tom mentioned, it is expensive, it is labor intensive, and it's not easy, but with the technology we have, it's not impossible. So we're going to be exploring in that way. And we look forward to working with you in the future on all of these initiatives and further initiatives. And yeah, that's about it. Just to finish my discussion, I would like to bring you to the final slide on this deck, and it's actually something that was written in April 2020. And we thought that the COVID pandemic would be over soon. So there was a call for action that was signed by the Assistant Director General for Communication and Information and also the Assistant Director General for Education of UNESCO that basically said, to summarize, that this is the moment that we lay the foundation for integrating systematically best practices to share knowledge in the post-COVID-19 future of learning. And in those best practices, open licensing is really key. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for now the next, I give the floor to Elena Rodriguez, who is a program specialist in UNESCO Havana. We'll talk about the next steps for Latin America and the Caribbean. Elena, the floor is yours, and I'm off. I give you back the screen.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of those who have joined us. Unfortunately, the sound quality is not sufficient for interpretation at this time.
Decía que como algunas de las personas que están en esta reunión tal vez recuerden, estuvieron con nosotros el día 7 de diciembre en la reunión de lanzamiento de la iniciativa de apoyo a la implementación de la recomendación de recursos educativos abiertos en el año para la región del Caribe y en particular para los pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo. Esta iniciativa es un esfuerzo de las oficinas de UNESCO en La Habana y Kingston para poder apoyar a los estados miembros de esta región en la implementación de las recomendaciones. Si escuchan bien, prefiero pasar...
Disculpe, perdone que la interrumpa, le habla el técnico aquí en la UNESCO.
Apologies for the interruption. This is the technician from UNESCO. We apologize for the interruption. However, the sound quality is going on and off, so interpretation is not possible.
I think we need to continue, and we will have it in English. I think Isabel can perhaps summarize in English. Or Isabel, go ahead.
I think we do here with our colleague Miguel Givina.
Yeah.
So Givina, you can go ahead.
Yo quería decir que
I just wanted to say that this document that we've been looking at and we've been listening to throughout this presentation, and that's about competence for teachers at 3 levels. I think it's an excellent document. I don't think I have ever seen such a good document from UNESCO, technically speaking, and I think it could be used across all our educational systems, in particular for training and capacity building of teachers. So I just want to express all my gratitude and congratulations to everybody who has worked in drafting this document. I commend all of you. What we're doing in Havana here along with the rest of the sector, is in terms of providing information. Well, our attitude is that this will really be useful in our education system. But this brings me on to one particular issue, which is the assessment of the teachers' competence levels. We need to work on that. Because of course it's important to know how you raise those levels, but above all you need to know how you judge and assess that level, because that will enable you to design a capacity building system that will be most efficient. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We are working with the Cuban ministry on this, and we will show them this because we are designing capacity building programs with our universities. We hope they will be very useful. So I have to say this has all been very useful. And I repeat, therefore, all my congratulations and commendations to everybody who's produced this excellent piece of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Isabel, would you like to? Thank you very much, Mr. Levino. We greatly appreciate your inputs, and thank you very much. And we apologize for these technical issues, which have sort of been hiccups along the way, but we really are very appreciative of all the time and your patience, all of your patiences with all of these technical issues that seem to be happening. Isabel, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Zeynep. Thank you all. I trust that you could benefit today from this workshop. Well, I have to sincerely apologize again for the interpretation technical issues that we confronted, especially at the beginning and now at the end of the meeting. I would like to thank Andrew, for your excellent facilitation and for sharing your extensive knowledge on the use of the ICT Competency Framework for teachers and open educational resources. Thank you, Telamid, for your update on the panorama of the open educational resources in the region. It was indeed very interesting. And of course, thanks to all the participants, the UNESCO Secretaries General of the National Commissions, experts in education and information fields, and others for your engagement in the workshops. You have posted really interesting questions and comments that we were able to gather, and we will ensure to address them in future training and meetings. Thank you, Zeynep, and our colleagues in communication and information sector. And I'm speaking also on behalf of UNESCO Havana office, of my colleagues Elena Napoles and Miguel Divina. Thank you to our colleagues at the communication and information sector for leading the organization of this workshop and for your always sure support. We certainly plan to implement other capacity building activities over these years, as well as other meetings addressing the different areas mentioned during the workshop today. And we will be thrilled of having you all with us again as we advance on implementing the open educational resource recommendation in the region. It has been a true pleasure to be with you today. And again, our sincere thanks for your active and valuable contribution. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you also to everybody for being here, for taking time from your busy schedule to be here. Thank you to Andrew, to Tel, again, of course, and Vincent, and also our technical support. Thank you very much. It's very kind, and we are working in the 21st century and on the digital world, and it's not always an easy ride every day, but it's wonderful that we always manage to get through and sail to the other side of the river. So thank you very much, and wish you all a very, very good day, afternoon, night, wherever you are, whatever you have come ahead of you. I
Right.
wish you the best. Stay safe, and thank you very much. Thanks. We look forward to working with you again. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.